Question 1. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a concealed pistol license holder encountering a situation requiring the use of their firearm for self-defense, coupled with a high potential severity of harm if such an encounter occurs. A licensed individual in Seattle, Washington, witnesses a person attempting to break into a parked car in a public parking lot. The individual is carrying a concealed pistol. What is the most appropriate course of action according to Washington state law? Option A. Call the police and observe the situation from a safe distance without engaging directly. Option B. Assess the situation for an immediate threat of death or great bodily harm to themselves or others, and if such a threat exists and cannot be avoided by other means, consider the use of force as a last resort. Option C. Intervene physically to apprehend the individual attempting to break into the car, using their concealed pistol if necessary to subdue them. Option D. Immediately draw their concealed pistol and confront the individual to prevent the car break-in. The correct answer is B. Assess the situation for an immediate threat of death or great bodily harm to themselves or others, and if such a threat exists and cannot be avoided by other means, consider the use of force as a last resort. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a concealed pistol license holder encountering a situation requiring the use of their firearm for self-defense, coupled with a high potential severity of harm if such an encounter occurs. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to make split-second decisions under extreme duress, balancing their right to self-defense with legal obligations and ethical considerations. The weight of responsibility in such a situation, where life and liberty are at stake, necessitates a thorough understanding of Washington state's concealed pistol license laws and the principles of lawful self-defense. The best professional approach involves a clear understanding and strict adherence to Washington state's legal framework for the use of deadly force. This means recognizing that the right to carry a concealed pistol does not grant a license to use it indiscriminately. Lawful self-defense in Washington state requires that a person reasonably believes they are in imminent danger of death or great bodily harm, and that the use of force is necessary to prevent that harm. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and retreat when safely possible, and only resorting to the use of deadly force as a last resort when all other reasonable options have been exhausted, and the threat of death or great bodily harm is immediate and unavoidable. This aligns with RCW 9-41-070 regarding the carrying of concealed pistols and RCW 9-16-050 concerning justifiable homicide. An incorrect approach would be to assume that carrying a concealed pistol grants broad authority to intervene in any perceived threat, regardless of the immediacy or severity of the danger to oneself. This fails to acknowledge the legal requirement of imminent danger and the necessity of the force used. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize the apprehension of a suspect or the prevention of property crime over personal safety, leading to the use of deadly force in situations where it is not legally justified under Washington law. This misinterprets the scope of self-defense and can lead to criminal charges. Finally, an approach that relies on subjective feelings of unease or general fear, without a concrete and immediate threat of death or great bodily harm, is also professionally unacceptable. This disregards the objective legal standard for justifiable use of force in Washington state. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes situational awareness, de-escalation techniques, and a clear understanding of legal boundaries. Before any action is taken, a mental checklist should assess the imminence of the threat, the proportionality of the response, and the availability of alternatives. This framework prioritizes preserving life and avoiding unnecessary legal entanglements by acting only when legally and ethically compelled to do so. Question 2. Considering the legal framework for concealed pistol licenses in Washington state, which approach best balances an individual's right to carry with the responsibilities of safe and lawful firearm ownership when deciding whether and how to carry a concealed pistol. Option A. Refraining from carrying the concealed pistol due to personal unease about potential public perception or scrutiny, even when legally permitted. Option B. Carrying the concealed pistol in a manner that is legally compliant but may cause apprehension in others, prioritizing the right to carry above all other considerations. Option C. Strictly adhering to all Washington state laws regarding concealed carry, ensuring the pistol is lawfully possessed and concealed, and maintaining a commitment to responsible firearm handling and storage. Option D. Carrying the concealed pistol in a manner that is not fully concealed or in a location where firearms are explicitly prohibited by Washington state law. The correct answer is C. Strictly adhering to all Washington state laws regarding concealed carry, ensuring the pistol is lawfully possessed and concealed, and maintaining a commitment to responsible firearm handling and storage. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate not only knowledge of Washington state's concealed pistol license (CPL) laws, but also the ability to apply them ethically and responsibly in a situation involving potential public perception and personal safety concerns. Careful judgment is required to navigate the nuances of legal requirements versus personal comfort and the potential for misinterpretation by others. The best approach involves understanding and adhering strictly to the legal requirements for carrying a concealed pistol in Washington state, while also being mindful of responsible firearm ownership principles. This means ensuring the firearm is lawfully possessed, the CPL is valid and carried on the person, and the individual is aware of and complies with all applicable state and local laws regarding carrying in specific locations. It also includes a personal commitment to safe handling and storage when not in use, and a readiness to act lawfully and responsibly if a situation arises where the firearm might be needed for self-defense. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and responsible conduct, which are the cornerstones of obtaining and maintaining a CPL in Washington. An approach that focuses solely on the legal right to carry without considering the broader implications of responsible firearm ownership and public perception is flawed. While legally permissible, carrying a concealed pistol in a manner that might unnecessarily alarm others, even if technically legal, can undermine public trust and create unnecessary tension. This fails to embrace the ethical dimension of responsible gun ownership. Another incorrect approach would be to avoid carrying the concealed pistol altogether due to personal discomfort or fear of scrutiny, even when legally permitted and potentially necessary for self-defense. This abdicates the responsibility that comes with the right to carry and may leave the individual vulnerable. The law grants the right to carry concealed, and responsible exercise of that right is part of the expectation. Finally, an approach that involves carrying the pistol in a manner that is not fully concealed, or in a location where carrying a firearm is prohibited by Washington state law, e.g., certain federal facilities, schools, is a direct violation of the law and would result in the immediate revocation of the CPL and potential criminal charges. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the legal framework governing concealed carry. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of Washington state's revised Code of Washington, RCW, pertaining to firearms and concealed carry. This should be coupled with an ethical consideration of responsible firearm ownership, including safe storage, handling, and awareness of the impact of carrying a firearm in public. When faced with a situation requiring a decision about carrying a concealed pistol, professionals should ask, am I legally permitted to carry in this location and in this manner? And am I prepared to act responsibly and lawfully if the need arises? Question 3. Investigation of a scenario in Washington state where a concealed pistol license, CPL holder, while lawfully carrying a concealed firearm, inadvertently has their firearm become partially visible to others in a public park. The CPL holder notices this and is concerned about causing alarm. What is the most responsible course of action for the CPL holder to take? Option A. Immediately contact local law enforcement to report that their firearm has become visible. Option B. Discreetly and calmly readjust their clothing or position to ensure the firearm is fully concealed again, while continuing to be aware of their surroundings for any genuine threats. Option C. Ignore the fact that the firearm is visible and continue with their activities as if nothing has happened. Option D. Immediately announce their CPL status and display their firearm to reassure bystanders that they are legally armed and not a threat. The correct answer is B. Discreetly and calmly readjust their clothing or position to ensure the firearm is fully concealed again, while continuing to be aware of their surroundings for any genuine threats. Explanation: investigation of a CPL holder's actions in Washington state requires careful consideration of revised Code of Washington RCW 9/41/270, which addresses unlawful discharge of firearms, and RCW 9/41/050 concerning the carrying of concealed pistols. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a CPL holder who, while legally possessing a firearm, may have acted in a manner that violates public safety laws or demonstrates poor judgment. The core issue is balancing the right to self-defense with the responsibility to avoid creating a public disturbance or endangering others. The correct approach involves a CPL holder who, upon realizing their firearm is visible and potentially causing alarm, immediately and discreetly secures the firearm in a manner that minimizes public attention and potential for misunderstanding, while also assessing the immediate environment for any genuine threats. This approach is correct because it prioritizes de-escalation and adherence to public safety regulations. RCW 9-41-270 prohibits the discharge of firearms in a manner that endangers others or creates a public nuisance. While the firearm was not discharged, its visible presence could be interpreted as a threat or cause alarm, especially if it was not properly concealed as per the intent of a concealed pistol license. Discreetly securing the firearm demonstrates responsible CPL ownership by minimizing potential for panic or misinterpretation, thereby upholding the spirit of the law, which permits concealed carry under specific conditions. An incorrect approach involves a CPL holder who, upon realizing their firearm is visible, immediately announces their CPL status and brandishes the firearm to assert their right to carry. This is incorrect because it escalates the situation unnecessarily and can be perceived as a threat, potentially violating RCW 9-41-270 by creating a public disturbance or alarm. It also demonstrates a lack of judgment in handling a sensitive situation. Another incorrect approach involves a CPL holder who, upon realizing their firearm is visible, ignores the situation and continues their activities as if nothing has happened. This is incorrect because it fails to address the potential for public alarm or misunderstanding, and it could be seen as a disregard for the responsibilities that come with carrying a concealed firearm. While not an overt violation, it demonstrates a lack of situational awareness and responsible CPL management. A further incorrect approach involves a CPL holder who, upon realizing their firearm is visible, immediately calls law enforcement to report their own firearm being visible. This is incorrect because it is an overreaction to a situation that does not inherently require law enforcement intervention, unless there is an immediate threat or a violation of law has occurred, can unnecessarily burden law enforcement resources and create unnecessary alarm. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes situational awareness, de-escalation, and adherence to the spirit and letter of the law. This involves assessing the environment for genuine threats, understanding the legal parameters of firearm possession and display, and acting in a manner that prioritizes public safety and minimizes potential for conflict or alarm. When a CPL holder's firearm becomes inadvertently visible, the immediate priority should be to discreetly reconceal it and assess if any actual threat exists, rather than escalating the situation or ignoring it. Question 4. A Washington state resident who has successfully obtained a concealed pistol license, CPL, is attending a community event held at a public park. The park has no signage indicating restrictions on firearms. The individual is aware that their CPL is valid and current. Considering the revised Code of Washington, RCW, regarding concealed pistol licenses, what is the most legally sound and professionally responsible course of action for this individual regarding carrying their concealed pistol? Option A. Carry the concealed pistol, but remain vigilant and prepared to immediately leave the park if any signage or law enforcement indicates that firearms are not permitted. Option B. Assume that since there is no signage prohibiting firearms, it is permissible to carry the concealed pistol anywhere within the public park. Option C. Carry the concealed pistol, understanding that a valid CPL generally permits carrying in public spaces unless specifically prohibited by statute or signage, and recognizing that public parks are not typically listed as statutorily prohibited locations under RCW 9-41-300 without specific circumstances. Option D. Leave the concealed pistol secured in their vehicle before entering the park to avoid any potential legal ambiguity, even though they possess a valid CPL. The correct answer is C. Carry the concealed pistol, understanding that a valid CPL generally permits carrying in public spaces unless specifically prohibited by statute or signage, and recognizing that public parks are not typically listed as statutorily prohibited locations under RCW 9-41 300 without specific circumstances. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed pistol in Washington state. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to the specific requirements of the Revised Code of Washington, RCW, concerning concealed pistol licenses, CPL, can lead to serious legal consequences, including license revocation and criminal charges. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are compliant with the law and promote public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively understanding and adhering to the Washington State RCW requirements for CPL holders. This includes being aware of the specific locations where carrying a concealed pistol is prohibited, even with a valid CPL, and understanding the legal definitions of these prohibited areas. Specifically, RCW 941-300 outlines these restrictions. A CPL holder must exercise due diligence to know and respect these boundaries to avoid unlawful possession of a firearm in a prohibited place. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a valid CPL automatically grants permission to carry a concealed pistol in all public spaces. This ignores the explicit restrictions detailed in RCW 941-300, such as prohibitions in schools, courthouses, and certain government buildings, even if not posted with signage. This failure to understand the limitations of the CPL is a significant legal and ethical lapse. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on signage to determine where carrying is prohibited. While signage can provide notice, the law itself defines prohibited locations regardless of whether a sign is present. Failing to know the statutory prohibitions means a CPL holder could inadvertently violate the law even in an unposted area. A third incorrect approach is to believe that a CPL holder can carry a concealed pistol in a prohibited area if they are merely passing through or do not intend to cause harm. Washington state law does not typically include such exceptions for mere passage or intent in its definition of prohibited locations. The presence of the firearm in the prohibited area itself constitutes a violation. Professional reasoning. Professionals carrying a concealed pistol in Washington state should adopt a proactive and informed approach. This involves thoroughly studying the relevant sections of the Revised Code of Washington, RCW, pertaining to CPLs and firearm possession. They should regularly review these laws for any updates or amendments. Furthermore, they should make a conscious effort to be aware of their surroundings and the legal status of any location they enter. When in doubt about the legality of carrying in a specific location, the safest and most responsible course of action is to leave the firearm secured elsewhere. This decision-making process prioritizes legal compliance, public safety, and the responsible exercise of Second Amendment rights. Question 5. The monitoring system indicates that a Washington resident who holds a valid concealed pistol license, CPL, has stored their handgun in a bedside table drawer in their home. The resident's 8-year-old child is also present in the home. The resident states they have instructed the child not to touch the firearm. Considering Washington state law and safe firearm storage practices, which of the following actions best represents responsible and legally compliant storage? Option A, storing the handgun in a locked gun safe or with a trigger lock that is inaccessible to the child. Option B, leaving the handgun in the bedside table drawer, assuming the child's understanding of the instructions is sufficient. Option C, storing the handgun under a pillow on the bed. Option D, placing the handgun in the bedside table drawer, as it is closed, and the child has been told not to touch it. The correct answer is A, storing the handgun in a locked gun safe or with a trigger lock that is inaccessible to the child. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential lapse in judgment regarding the storage of a firearm. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance personal convenience with strict adherence to Washington state law concerning firearm safety and accessibility, particularly when minors are present. The core issue revolves around the legal definition of secure storage and the responsibility to prevent unauthorized access to a firearm. The best professional approach involves ensuring the firearm is stored in a manner that prevents any unauthorized person, especially a minor, from accessing it. This means utilizing a locking device that renders the firearm inoperable and inaccessible. Washington State Law, specifically Revised Code of Washington RCW 941-050, and related statutes concerning child access prevention, mandates that firearms be stored securely to prevent access by individuals who are not legally permitted to possess them. This includes children. Therefore, storing the firearm in a locked container or with a trigger lock that is inaccessible to a minor is the legally compliant and ethically sound practice. Storing the firearm in a bedside table drawer without a locking mechanism, even if the drawer is closed, is a failure to meet the legal standard for secure storage. While the drawer might offer a minimal physical barrier, it does not prevent a curious child from opening it and accessing the firearm, which is a direct violation of child access prevention laws and a significant safety risk. This approach demonstrates a disregard for the legal requirements and the inherent dangers of unsecured firearms in a household with children. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that simply placing the firearm under a pillow is sufficient. This offers no security whatsoever and is an extremely dangerous practice, making the firearm immediately accessible to anyone in the vicinity, including children. This is a clear violation of safe storage principles and Washington state law. Finally, relying on the fact that the child has been instructed not to touch the firearm is an insufficient safeguard. Legal requirements for secure storage are not based on verbal instructions to children, but on physical prevention of access. Children's curiosity and understanding of rules can vary, and relying solely on their compliance is a negligent act that can have tragic consequences. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and safety above all else. This involves understanding the specific requirements of Washington state law regarding firearm storage, particularly concerning child access prevention. When in doubt, err on the side of caution and implement the most secure storage method available. This framework requires a proactive approach to risk assessment and a commitment to responsible gun ownership that protects both the owner and the community, especially vulnerable individuals like children. Question 6. Market research demonstrates that individuals with a Washington State Concealed Pistol License, CPL, often encounter situations where they are unsure about the legality of carrying a concealed pistol in specific establishments. Consider a CPL holder who is planning to attend a community event held at a local public library in Seattle, Washington. The library is a publicly accessible building, but it also houses administrative offices and meeting rooms used by various community groups. The CPL holder has not seen any explicit signage prohibiting firearms at the library entrance. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for this individual? Option A. Ask other attendees at the community event if they know whether carrying a concealed pistol is allowed in the library. Option B. Rely on the general understanding that public buildings are usually safe to carry in unless specifically prohibited by signage. Option C. Assume that since there is no explicit "no guns" sign at the entrance, carrying a concealed pistol is permitted in the public library. Option D. Proactively consult the Revised Code of Washington, RCW, and relevant case law to determine if a public library, particularly one with administrative offices and meeting rooms, is a statutorily prohibited location for concealed pistol carry under Washington state law. The correct answer is D. Proactively consult the Revised Code of Washington, RCW, and relevant case law to determine if a public library, particularly one with administrative offices and meeting rooms, is a statutorily prohibited location for concealed pistol carry under Washington state law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the interpretation and application of Washington State's Concealed Pistol License, CPL, laws in a dynamic, real-world situation. The core difficulty lies in balancing the individual's right to self-defense with the legal restrictions and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed pistol. A CPL holder must exercise sound judgment and possess a thorough understanding of where their license permits them to carry, especially in locations that may have nuanced restrictions or prohibitions. This requires more than rote memorization. It demands an analytical approach to specific circumstances. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves proactively verifying the legality of carrying a concealed pistol in the specific location by consulting official Washington state statutes and relevant case law. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal requirements and prohibitions outlined in Washington law. Specifically, Revised Code of Washington, RCW 9/41/050, and related statutes define prohibited places for concealed pistol carry. By consulting these official sources, the individual ensures their actions are compliant with the law, thereby avoiding potential legal repercussions and upholding their responsibility as a CPL holder. This demonstrates a commitment to responsible firearm ownership and adherence to the legal framework governing CPLs in Washington state. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely on general assumptions or hearsay about where firearms are prohibited. This is a significant regulatory failure because it bypasses the definitive legal guidance provided by Washington state statutes. General assumptions are prone to inaccuracies and may not reflect the specific nuances of the law, leading to unintentional violations. Another incorrect approach is to assume that if a location does not explicitly display a no-gun sign, then carrying a concealed pistol is permitted. This is a regulatory failure because Washington law prohibits concealed carry in certain locations regardless of signage. For example, RCW 9/41/052 lists specific locations like courthouses, correctional facilities, and secure areas of airports where carrying is prohibited by statute, not by posted notice. A third incorrect approach is to defer judgment to the discretion of private property owners, without first confirming the legality of carrying in that specific type of establishment under Washington state law. While private property owners can prohibit firearms on their premises, the CPL holder's primary obligation is to understand the state-level prohibitions first. Failing to do so could result in carrying in a statutorily prohibited location, even if the property owner would have permitted it. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and responsible conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the specific location and its potential legal status regarding firearm carry. 2. Consulting authoritative legal resources, such as the Revised Code of Washington, RCW, and relevant Attorney General opinions or case law, to determine any statutory prohibitions. 3. If the location is private property, understanding that while the owner may have additional restrictions, the state-level prohibitions must be respected first. 4. Making a decision based on verified legal information, erring on the side of caution if any ambiguity exists. Question 7. Market research demonstrates that individuals seeking to obtain or maintain a concealed pistol license, CPL, in Washington state often have questions regarding the specific locations where carrying a concealed firearm is legally permissible. Considering the Revised Code of Washington, RCW, concerning firearms, which of the following actions best reflects responsible and legally compliant behavior for a CPL holder in Washington state? Option A. Relying on advice from friends or online forums to determine where carrying a concealed pistol is permissible, rather than consulting the official statutes. Option B. Believing that carrying a concealed pistol in a prohibited location is permissible as long as the firearm remains concealed and is not brandished. Option C. Proactively researching and understanding the specific locations prohibited for carrying a concealed pistol as outlined in RCW 9/41/300 and refraining from carrying in those areas. Option D. Assuming that a valid CPL allows carrying a concealed pistol in all public spaces, unless explicitly posted otherwise, with a firearm prohibition sign. The correct answer is C. Proactively researching and understanding the specific locations prohibited for carrying a concealed pistol as outlined in RCW 9/41/300 and refraining from carrying in those areas. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed pistol in Washington state. Misinterpreting or disregarding Washington's concealed pistol license, CPL, laws can lead to severe legal consequences, including license revocation and criminal charges. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with all statutes and to act ethically and responsibly. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves understanding and strictly adhering to Washington state's Revised Code, RCW, regarding concealed pistol licenses. This includes knowing the specific locations where carrying a concealed pistol is prohibited, even with a valid CPL. For instance, RCW 9/41 300 outlines numerous prohibited places, such as courthouses, correctional facilities, and secure areas of airports. A responsible CPL holder must proactively inform themselves of these restrictions and avoid carrying a concealed pistol in any location explicitly forbidden by state law. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and public safety, which are paramount for any licensed firearm carrier. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a valid CPL grants unrestricted carrying rights in all public spaces. This overlooks the detailed list of prohibited locations specified in RCW 941-300. Failing to recognize these statutory limitations is a direct violation of Washington law and demonstrates a lack of due diligence. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice or personal interpretation of the law, rather than consulting the official revised Code of Washington. This can lead to significant misunderstandings of legal requirements and potential violations. The law is precise, and informal advice is not a substitute for understanding the codified statutes. A third incorrect approach is to believe that carrying a concealed pistol in a prohibited area is acceptable if the firearm is not openly displayed. Washington law does not differentiate between open and concealed carry in terms of prohibited location. The presence of the firearm itself is the violation. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the intent and scope of the relevant statutes. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Washington state who hold a CPL should adopt a proactive and diligent approach to legal compliance. This involves regularly reviewing the most current version of the revised Code of Washington pertaining to firearms and concealed carry. When in doubt about the legality of carrying a concealed pistol in a specific location, the safest and most professional course of action is to err on the side of caution and refrain from carrying. Seeking clarification from official sources, such as the Washington State Legislature's website or legal counsel specializing in firearms law, is also advisable. Question 8. The audit findings indicate that a Washington state resident submitted their concealed pistol license, CPL, renewal application 85 days before their current license was set to expire. During the processing of this renewal, it was noted that the applicant had recently moved within Washington state. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Reject the renewal application and instruct the applicant to reapply as if they were a new applicant because of the address change. Option B. Process the renewal application as it was received within the legally mandated time frame and verify the applicant's current Washington state residency. Option C. Deny the renewal application due to the applicant's recent change of address, requiring them to submit a new application. Option D. Inform the applicant that they must wait until their current CPL expires before submitting a renewal application. The correct answer is B. Process the renewal application as it was received within the legally mandated time frame and verify the applicant's current Washington state residency. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in adherence to Washington state's concealed pistol license, CPL, renewal procedures, specifically concerning the timely submission of required documentation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires immediate and accurate assessment of the applicant's eligibility and the correct application of Washington state law regarding CPL renewals. Misinterpreting the renewal window or the required documentation could lead to either the unlawful issuance of a renewed CPL or the unjustified denial of a renewal, both of which carry significant legal and ethical implications for the licensing authority. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the applicant's submitted renewal application against the specific requirements outlined in Washington state law, particularly revised Code of Washington, RCW 941-170, which governs CPL renewals. This approach prioritizes strict adherence to the statutory timeframe for renewal applications. If the application is received within the 90-day window prior to expiration and all other statutory requirements are met, the renewal should proceed. This ensures that the applicant maintains their legal right to carry concealed while complying with all legal mandates. The licensing authority has a duty to process renewals efficiently and accurately within the established legal framework. An incorrect approach would be to immediately deny the renewal solely because the applicant mentioned a recent move, without verifying if the new address is still within Washington state or if the applicant has otherwise become disqualified. This fails to consider that a change of address, while requiring notification, does not automatically invalidate a CPL if the applicant remains a resident of Washington and meets all other criteria. Another incorrect approach would be to accept the renewal application despite it being submitted significantly after the expiration date without proper reapplication procedures. This would violate RCW 941-170, which implies a continuous renewal process and does not permit late renewals without a new application. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to inform the applicant that they must wait for their current CPL to expire before reapplying, even if their renewal application was submitted within the legally permissible window. This misunderstands the renewal process and could unnecessarily disenfranchise a law-abiding citizen. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with understanding the specific legal requirements of Washington State's CPL renewal statutes. This involves carefully examining the date of application submission relative to the expiration date, verifying residency, and confirming that no disqualifying factors have arisen. When in doubt, consulting the relevant statutes or seeking guidance from legal counsel within the licensing agency is paramount. The focus must always be on upholding the law while ensuring fair and efficient processing for applicants. Question 9. Strategic planning requires a Washington resident to consider their legal standing when facing a situation where their concealed pistol license, CPL, has been revoked. If this individual is informed that their CPL has been revoked, but they have not yet received the official written notification, what is the most prudent course of action regarding carrying a concealed pistol? Option A. Carry the concealed pistol openly, as this is not prohibited by the CPL revocation. Option B. Continue carrying the concealed pistol, assuming it is still valid until the official revocation notice is received. Option C. Ask a friend who also carries a concealed pistol if it is permissible to continue carrying. Option D. Immediately cease carrying any concealed pistol until the CPL is officially reinstated. The correct answer is D. Immediately cease carrying any concealed pistol until the CPL is officially reinstated. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between a citizen's right to self-defense and the legal requirements for carrying a concealed pistol in Washington State. The individual is facing a situation that could escalate, requiring them to make a rapid decision about their CPL status and its implications. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Washington law while also prioritizing personal safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to immediately cease carrying the concealed pistol until the CPL is reinstated. This approach is correct because Washington state law, specifically Revised Code of Washington, RCW 941-040, prohibits individuals whose CPL has been revoked or suspended from carrying a concealed pistol. Continuing to carry a concealed pistol without a valid CPL is a criminal offense. Prioritizing legal compliance ensures that the individual does not commit a new crime, which could further complicate their ability to obtain a CPL in the future and could lead to arrest and prosecution. Incorrect approach is analysis. Continuing to carry the concealed pistol, believing that the previous CPL is still valid until the official revocation notice is received, is an incorrect approach. This fails to acknowledge that the revocation is effective as per the legal process, regardless of immediate personal receipt of formal documentation. Washington law does not permit carrying based on the assumption of validity. It requires an active, unrevoked CPL. Carrying the concealed pistol openly, assuming this bypasses the concealed carry restrictions, is also an incorrect approach. While Washington law distinguishes between concealed and open carry, the revocation of a CPL often impacts the ability to carry firearms in general, and open carry may still be subject to specific local ordinances or broader prohibitions, depending on the circumstances of the revocation. More importantly, the core issue is the individual's legal standing to carry a firearm, which is compromised by the CPL revocation. Seeking advice from a friend who also carries a concealed pistol about whether it's permissible to continue carrying is an incorrect approach. Relying on informal advice from non-legal or non-law enforcement sources is dangerous. Legal requirements for firearm possession and carry are specific and must be understood from official sources or legal counsel, not from peers who may have incomplete or inaccurate information. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing a situation where their legal authority to carry a concealed weapon has been revoked should follow a clear decision-making process. 1. Immediately cease the activity that requires the revoked authorization. In this case, stop carrying the concealed pistol. 2. Consult official sources for clarification on the revocation and reinstatement process. This includes contacting the issuing authority, e.g., the sheriff's office, or seeking legal counsel. 3. Understand that legal requirements supersede personal assumptions or peer advice. Compliance with the law is paramount. 4. Take proactive steps to rectify the situation, such as addressing the reasons for revocation and following the proper procedures for reinstatement. Question 10. Compliance review shows that a Washington State concealed pistol license holder is preparing for their CPL renewal. The qualification course requires a minimum score of 200 points. The shooter fired 20 rounds at the designated WSB qualification target. The results are as follows: 5 shots in the 10-point zone, 7 shots in the 9-point zone, 4 shots in the 8-point zone, and 4 shots that landed on the line between the 8-point and 7-point zones. Using the Washington State Patrol's standard scoring, what is the shooter's total score for this qualification attempt? Option A, 178 points. Option B, 174 points. Option C, 182 points. Option D, 186 points. The correct answer is C, 182 points. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the accurate calculation of firearm proficiency scores under Washington State's Concealed Pistol License (CPL) renewal requirements. The challenge lies in correctly interpreting the scoring rubric and applying it to a given set of target hits, ensuring compliance with the Washington State Patrol's WSB established standards for renewal. Misinterpretation or miscalculation can lead to an invalid renewal application, potentially impacting the licensee's ability to carry a concealed pistol legally. Careful judgment is required to ensure the score accurately reflects the shooter's performance according to the specific parameters of the renewal qualification. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously counting the number of shots that fall within the designated scoring zones of the target, and then applying the WSB's established scoring formula. This approach directly adheres to the regulatory framework for CPL renewal in Washington State, which mandates a minimum score achieved through a standardized qualification course. The WSB's guidelines specify the target, the scoring zones, and the minimum score required. By accurately counting and calculating, the applicant ensures their renewal application is based on verifiable performance metrics, meeting the legal requirements for continued licensure. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves rounding down the score if any part of a shot touches the line of a scoring zone. This is a regulatory failure because Washington State's CPL renewal scoring typically counts a shot as hitting a zone if any part of the projectile breaks the line of that zone. Failing to award points for shots on the line results in an artificially low score, potentially below the renewal threshold. Another incorrect approach is to only count shots that are clearly within the highest scoring rings, ignoring shots that land in lower value scoring zones, but still within the target's scoring area. This is an ethical and regulatory failure, as it misrepresents the shooter's actual performance and fails to adhere to the defined scoring parameters of the qualification course. The WSB standards are designed to assess a baseline level of proficiency across the entire scoring area, not just the most precise shots. A further incorrect approach is to average the scores from multiple attempts without considering if any single attempt met the minimum requirement. While practice is encouraged, the renewal qualification typically requires a single, successful demonstration of proficiency. Averaging scores without meeting the minimum on any individual attempt does not satisfy the regulatory requirement for a valid renewal qualification. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach CPL renewal qualifications by first understanding the specific scoring rubric provided by the Washington State Patrol. This involves carefully examining the target diagram, identifying each scoring zone and its point value, and noting any specific rules regarding shots on the line. Before firing, they should mentally prepare to meticulously count each shot's placement. After firing, they should systematically go through each shot, assigning points according to the rubric, and then sum these points. If the total score meets or exceeds the minimum requirement, the qualification is valid. If not, the shooter must retake the qualification. This methodical, rule-based approach ensures accuracy and compliance with legal mandates. Question 11. The risk matrix shows a potential confrontation developing at a public park in Seattle, Washington. You are a licensed CPL holder and observe an individual exhibiting agitated behavior, shouting at passersby, and appearing increasingly aggressive. While you feel uneasy, the individual has not directly threatened you or anyone else, nor are they physically close enough to pose an immediate physical danger. What is the most appropriate course of action according to Washington state law and responsible CPL holder conduct? Option A. Approach the individual to verbally de-escalate the situation and understand their concerns. Option B. Immediately draw your concealed pistol to deter the individual and signal your readiness to defend yourself. Option C. Maintain situational awareness, avoid direct engagement, and be prepared to disengage or seek assistance if the situation escalates to an immediate threat to life or serious bodily harm. Option D. Discreetly inform park security or law enforcement of the individual's behavior without drawing attention to yourself. The correct answer is C. Maintain situational awareness, avoid direct engagement, and be prepared to disengage or seek assistance if the situation escalates to an immediate threat to life or serious bodily harm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between a citizen's right to self-defense and the legal requirements for carrying a concealed pistol in Washington state. The individual's perceived threat, while real to them, must be evaluated against established legal standards for the use of deadly force and the conditions under which a concealed pistol license, CPL, holder can carry. Misinterpreting the threat or acting impulsively based on fear could lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of their CPL. Careful judgment is required to ensure actions are both legally permissible and ethically sound. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves prioritizing immediate safety while adhering strictly to Washington state law regarding CPL holders. This means assessing the situation to determine if an immediate, unavoidable threat to life or serious bodily harm exists. If such a threat is present, the individual may be justified in drawing their concealed pistol for self-defense. However, the legal justification for using deadly force is narrowly defined. If the threat is not immediate or can be de-escalated or avoided through other means, the individual should not draw their weapon. The primary objective is to avoid the use of force if possible, and if force is used, it must be a last resort and proportionate to the threat. This approach aligns with Washington's self-defense statutes, which permit the use of force, including deadly force, only when necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately draw the concealed pistol upon perceiving a potential threat, even if the threat is not imminent or unavoidable. This action could be construed as an aggressive act rather than a defensive one, potentially escalating the situation and leading to legal repercussions if no immediate danger is present. Washington law requires that the use of deadly force be necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm. Drawing a weapon without such an imminent threat violates this principle. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the fact that a valid CPL is possessed as justification for drawing the weapon. A CPL permits the lawful carrying of a concealed pistol, but it does not grant carte blanche to draw or use the weapon under any perceived threat. The legal justification for drawing and using a firearm is separate from the license to carry it and is governed by the principles of self-defense. A further incorrect approach is to attempt to confront or verbally challenge the individual perceived as a threat before assessing the immediate danger. While de-escalation is often a good strategy, engaging aggressively or confrontationally without first ensuring personal safety could place the CPL holder in greater danger and potentially negate the justification for self-defense if the situation deteriorates due to their actions. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with such situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes immediate threat assessment, adherence to legal statutes, and de-escalation whenever possible. The framework involves 1. Observe and assess, quickly and accurately evaluate the nature and imminence of any threat. 2. Legal compliance. Understand and apply Washington state's laws regarding self-defense and the use of deadly force. 3. Avoidance and de-escalation. Seek opportunities to disengage or de-escalate without compromising safety. 4. Last resort. If and only if an imminent threat to life or serious bodily harm exists and cannot be avoided, consider defensive actions, always using the minimum force necessary. Question 12. What factors determine the most prudent course of action for a Washington State concealed pistol license holder who is verbally threatened and physically approached by an aggressive individual in a public park? Option A. Immediately and calmly disengage from the confrontation and seek a safe location away from the perceived threat. Option B. Attempt to physically subdue the aggressor while keeping the concealed pistol ready. Option C. Remain in place and prepare to defend oneself without attempting to disengage. Option D. Draw the concealed pistol and verbally warn the aggressor to back down. Correct answer is A. Immediately and calmly disengage from the confrontation and seek a safe location away from the perceived threat. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with strict adherence to Washington state law regarding concealed carry. The presence of a firearm, even if legally possessed, introduces a significant responsibility. Misinterpreting or disregarding the nuances of the law can lead to severe legal consequences, including the loss of the CPL and potential criminal charges. The individual must make a judgment call under stress, where a wrong decision could have life-altering repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediately and calmly disengaging from the confrontation and seeking a safe location away from the perceived threat. This aligns with the principle of de-escalation and prioritizing personal safety without escalating the situation with the firearm. Washington State Law, specifically Revised Code of Washington RCW 9-41-070, permits carrying a concealed pistol but does not mandate its use or display in every confrontational situation. The law emphasizes avoiding unnecessary escalation. By disengaging, the individual avoids creating a situation where the use of deadly force might be considered, which carries a very high legal and ethical burden. This approach prioritizes avoiding harm and legal entanglements by removing oneself from the immediate danger. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to draw the firearm and verbally warn the aggressor to back down. This action escalates the situation significantly and can be interpreted as an aggressive act, even if the intent is defensive. Washington law does not grant a right to brandish a firearm as a warning. Such an action could lead to charges of assault or unlawful display of a weapon, and it increases the likelihood of the situation devolving into violence. Another incorrect approach is to remain in place and prepare to defend oneself without attempting to disengage. While the right to self-defense exists, the law generally expects individuals to retreat if safely possible before resorting to deadly force. Remaining in a confrontational stance without attempting to de-escalate or escape can be viewed as contributing to the escalation, and it may weaken the justification for using deadly force if it becomes necessary. A further incorrect approach is to attempt to physically subdue the aggressor while still concealing the firearm. This is dangerous as it involves close-quarters physical confrontation where the firearm could be lost, taken, or accidentally discharged. It also bypasses the primary advantage of concealed carry, which is to have a means of defense available if absolutely necessary, without necessarily engaging in a physical struggle. Professional reasoning. Professionals in situations involving potential threats and legal carry of firearms should always prioritize de-escalation and avoidance of confrontation. The decision-making process should involve assessing the immediate threat, evaluating the possibility of safe disengagement, and understanding that the legal justification for using a firearm is extremely narrow and typically reserved for situations where there is an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm. Adherence to RCW 9-41-070 and general principles of responsible firearm ownership dictates that avoidance and retreat are preferred over confrontation. Question 13. The risk matrix shows a minor verbal altercation occurring in a public park in Seattle, Washington. You are legally carrying a concealed pistol under your Washington State concealed pistol license. Several individuals are shouting at each other, but there is no immediate indication of physical violence or weapons being displayed. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Ignore the situation and walk away quickly to avoid any involvement. Option B. Maintain a safe distance, observe the situation, and discreetly contact law enforcement to report the disturbance. Option C. Immediately draw your concealed pistol to assert your presence and deter further escalation of the argument. Option D. Physically step between the individuals to break up the argument and prevent any potential physical contact. Correct answer is B. Maintain a safe distance, observe the situation, and discreetly contact law enforcement to report the disturbance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the licensee to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed pistol in Washington state. The presence of a firearm, even when legally carried, introduces a heightened level of risk and necessitates careful judgment to avoid escalating a situation or misinterpreting legal boundaries. The licensee must understand that their CPL does not grant them carte blanche to intervene in every situation, nor does it absolve them of the responsibility to act lawfully and reasonably. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalating the situation and contacting law enforcement. This approach is correct because Washington state law, specifically Revised Code of Washington, RCW 9-41-070, governs the carrying of concealed pistols and emphasizes responsible possession. While a CPL holder is permitted to carry a concealed pistol, the law does not mandate or encourage intervention in minor disturbances. Prioritizing personal safety and avoiding unnecessary confrontation aligns with the ethical responsibility of a firearm licensee to act with prudence and restraint. Contacting law enforcement ensures that trained professionals handle the situation, minimizing the risk of unintended consequences or legal repercussions for the CPL holder. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately drawing the concealed pistol to assert authority or deter the individuals. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Drawing a firearm without an immediate, overt threat of serious bodily harm or death is not legally justified under Washington law and could be construed as brandishing a weapon, a criminal offense. It escalates a potentially minor situation into a dangerous one and violates the principle of using deadly force only as a last resort. Another incorrect approach is to physically intervene and attempt to break up the argument. While the intent might be to prevent escalation, physically engaging with individuals, especially when a firearm is present, carries substantial risks. It could lead to the licensee being assaulted, or the situation escalating to a point where the licensee feels compelled to use their firearm, potentially unlawfully. This action exceeds the scope of a CPL holder's rights and responsibilities and could result in criminal charges or civil liability. A third incorrect approach is to ignore the situation entirely and leave the area without taking any action. While avoiding confrontation is generally advisable, completely disengaging without considering the potential for harm to others or the possibility of reporting a crime in progress can be problematic. If the disturbance were to escalate into a violent crime, a licensee who had the opportunity to report it but chose not to might face scrutiny. The most prudent course is to ensure personal safety while also taking reasonable steps to alert authorities if a crime is occurring or imminent. Professional reasoning. Professionals carrying a concealed pistol in Washington state should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legality, and proportionality. This framework involves 1. Situational assessment. Quickly evaluate the threat level and the immediate danger to oneself and others. 2. De-escalation. Attempt to verbally de-escalate if safe to do so, or create distance. 3. Legal boundaries. Understand that carrying a concealed pistol does not grant authority to enforce laws or intervene in minor disputes. 4. Law enforcement contact. If a crime is occurring or imminent, or if the situation poses a significant threat, contact law enforcement immediately. 5. Use of force. Only consider the use of a firearm as a last resort when facing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm, in accordance with Washington state law. Question 14. The risk matrix shows a situation where an individual with a Washington state concealed pistol license, CPL, is walking through a dimly lit parking lot at night. They observe two individuals in the distance who appear to be loitering near a vehicle, speaking in hushed tones and glancing in the direction of the CPL holder. The CPL holder feels a sense of unease and a general feeling of being watched. What is the most appropriate course of action according to Washington state law and professional firearm safety principles? Option A. Assume the individuals pose a threat due to their behavior and draw the concealed pistol as a precautionary measure to ensure personal safety. Option B. Proceed directly towards the individuals to inquire about their presence and intentions, while keeping the concealed pistol readily accessible but not drawn. Option C. Immediately draw the concealed pistol and confront the individuals to ascertain their intentions and deter any potential aggression. Option D. Assess the immediate environment for any overt actions by the individuals that indicate an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm, while maintaining situational awareness and preparing to take evasive action if necessary, but refraining from drawing the concealed pistol unless such an imminent threat materializes. The correct answer is D. Assess the immediate environment for any overt actions by the individuals that indicate an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm, while maintaining situational awareness and preparing to take evasive action if necessary, but refraining from drawing the concealed pistol unless such an imminent threat materializes. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between a citizen's right to self-defense and the legal requirements for carrying a concealed pistol in Washington state. The individual's perceived threat, while real to them, must be assessed against established legal standards and the specific conditions under which a concealed pistol license, CPL, holder can legally draw their weapon. Misinterpreting these standards can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges, even if the intent was self-preservation. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between a situation justifying the drawing of a weapon and one that does not, adhering strictly to Washington state law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to assess the immediate threat level based on objective criteria and Washington state's legal definition of self-defense. This involves determining if there is an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm. If such a threat exists, and the individual has a valid CPL, drawing the pistol may be legally permissible as a defensive measure. However, the primary goal remains de-escalation and avoidance of conflict if safely possible. This approach aligns with Washington's Revised Code of Washington, RCW 9-41-040 regarding concealed pistol licenses and RCW 9-41-046 concerning the use of deadly force, which emphasizes the necessity of an imminent threat. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to draw the pistol solely based on a feeling of unease or a general sense of being threatened without a clear, imminent danger. This fails to meet the legal threshold for self-defense in Washington state, which requires a reasonable belief of imminent death or great bodily harm. Such an action could be construed as brandishing a weapon unlawfully, violating RCW 9-41-270. Another incorrect approach is to immediately draw the pistol and confront the individuals, even if the perceived threat is not immediate or severe. This escalates the situation unnecessarily and moves beyond a defensive posture. Washington law permits the use of deadly force only when necessary to prevent death or great bodily harm, not for aggressive confrontation or to intimidate. A further incorrect approach is to assume that having a CPL automatically grants the right to draw a weapon in any situation where one feels uncomfortable or potentially threatened. The CPL permits concealed carry, but the legal justification for drawing a weapon is governed by self-defense laws, not by the mere possession of the license. This misunderstands the distinction between carrying a firearm and using it. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation and adherence to legal statutes. This involves 1. Situational awareness, continuously assessing the environment for actual threats, not just perceived ones. 2. Threat assessment, objectively evaluating the imminence and severity of any threat based on observable actions and circumstances. 3. Legal compliance, understanding and applying Washington state's laws regarding concealed carry and the use of deadly force. 4. Proportionality, ensuring any action taken is a proportional response to the threat. 5. Documentation and reporting. If a firearm is drawn, meticulously documenting the events and reporting them as required. The core principle is to act only when legally justified and absolutely necessary for self-preservation. Question 15. The risk matrix shows a moderate probability of a verbal altercation escalating into a physical one with an agitated individual in a grocery store aisle in Seattle, Washington. You are legally carrying a concealed pistol under your CPL. What is the most prudent course of action? Option A. Discreetly observe the individual's behavior, maintain awareness of your surroundings, and prepare to take defensive action only if an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm arises. Option B. Immediately draw your concealed pistol and verbally command the individual to calm down and leave the area. Option C. Approach the individual directly and attempt to de-escalate the situation through assertive questioning about their behavior. Option D. Continue your shopping as if nothing is happening, assuming the individual's behavior is not directed at you or a significant threat. The correct answer is A. Discreetly observe the individual's behavior, maintain awareness of your surroundings, and prepare to take defensive action only if an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm arises. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct confrontation with an individual who is exhibiting concerning behavior, potentially escalating to a threat, while the licensee is in a public place where their actions have broader implications for public safety and their own legal standing. The licensee must balance the immediate need to de-escalate or respond to a perceived threat with the strict legal requirements governing the carrying and use of a concealed pistol in Washington state. Misjudgment can lead to legal repercussions, injury, or death. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing de-escalation and observation while maintaining situational awareness and preparing to take defensive action only if absolutely necessary and legally justified. This approach aligns with the principles of responsible firearm ownership and the legal framework in Washington state, which emphasizes that a concealed pistol is a tool of last resort for self-defense. RCW 941-070 outlines the conditions under which a person may carry a concealed pistol, and while it permits carrying, it does not mandate or encourage its immediate display or use in non-threatening situations. The focus is on the lawful carrying of the weapon, not its preemptive deployment. Ethical considerations also dictate that a licensee should avoid escalating a situation and only resort to force when facing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm, as defined by Washington's self-defense laws. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately draw the concealed pistol and confront the individual. This action is a significant escalation that could be perceived as aggressive and may provoke the individual further, potentially creating the very threat the licensee is trying to avoid. Legally, drawing a firearm without an immediate, overt threat of death or serious bodily harm can be construed as brandishing a weapon, which is a crime in Washington state RCW 941-270. Ethically, it violates the principle of using the minimum force necessary. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individual completely and continue with the original activity without any assessment of the potential threat. While de-escalation is important, complete inaction in the face of potentially dangerous behavior could put the licensee and others at risk if the situation deteriorates. Washington law permits carrying a concealed pistol for self-defense, implying a responsibility to be aware of one's surroundings and to take reasonable steps to ensure safety. Ignoring a clear and present danger, if it exists, would be a dereliction of that responsibility. A further incorrect approach is to verbally challenge the individual aggressively and demand they leave. Similar to drawing the weapon, this is an escalation that can provoke a violent response. While communication is a de-escalation tool, aggressive verbal confrontation is not, can transform a passive threat into an active one, and may lead to legal issues related to assault or disturbing the peace, depending on the specifics of the interaction. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a layered approach to threat assessment and response. First, maintain situational awareness and observe the behavior. Second, if the behavior appears concerning but not immediately threatening, attempt subtle de-escalation or create distance if possible. Third, if the behavior escalates to a clear and present danger of death or serious bodily harm, prepare to use the concealed pistol as a last resort, ensuring all actions are legally justifiable under Washington state self-defense statutes. The decision to deploy force must be based on an objective assessment of imminent danger, not on fear or the desire to preemptively resolve a situation. Question 16. The risk matrix shows a potential for increased crime in a specific neighborhood park in Seattle, Washington. You are a Washington State Concealed Pistol License, CPL, holder and are considering carrying your concealed pistol while walking through this park. Based on Washington state law, what is the most prudent course of action to ensure legal compliance? Option A. Rely on the advice of a friend who also holds a CPL and believes parks are generally safe to carry in. Option B. Assume that carrying a concealed pistol in a public park is permissible as long as you have a valid CPL. Option C. Carry your concealed pistol, but keep it discreetly concealed and avoid any interaction with law enforcement. Option D. Verify that the park is not explicitly listed as a prohibited location under Washington state law for CPL holders before carrying. The correct answer is D. Verify that the park is not explicitly listed as a prohibited location under Washington state law for CPL holders before carrying. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for self-defense with strict adherence to Washington state's concealed pistol license, CPL, laws and regulations. Misinterpreting or disregarding these laws, even with good intentions, can lead to serious legal consequences, including the revocation of a CPL and potential criminal charges. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the nuances of where a CPL holder can and cannot carry a concealed pistol. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of Washington state's revised code, RCW, concerning firearms and CPL holders. Specifically, RCW 9/41/300 outlines prohibited places where carrying a concealed pistol is unlawful, even with a valid CPL. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and responsible firearm ownership. By knowing the specific prohibitions, such as carrying in schools, courthouses, or secure areas of government buildings, an individual can make informed decisions to avoid illegal possession. This aligns with the ethical obligation of a CPL holder to act within the bounds of the law, ensuring public safety and maintaining the privilege of carrying a concealed firearm. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a valid CPL automatically grants permission to carry a concealed pistol in all public spaces. This fails to acknowledge the specific statutory restrictions outlined in RCW 9/41/300. The regulatory failure here is a lack of knowledge regarding prohibited locations, which can lead to unintentional violations. Another incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice or personal interpretation of the law, rather than consulting the official statutes. This can lead to dangerous assumptions and a misunderstanding of legal boundaries. The ethical failure is a lack of due diligence in understanding one's legal responsibilities as a CPL holder. A third incorrect approach is to carry a concealed pistol in a prohibited location based on a perceived immediate threat, without first assessing whether the location itself is legally permissible for carrying. While self-defense is a primary reason for obtaining a CPL, the law dictates that this right is not absolute and is subject to specific geographical and institutional limitations. The regulatory and ethical failure is prioritizing a subjective assessment of threat over objective legal prohibitions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and informed approach to firearm laws. This involves regularly reviewing relevant statutes, such as RCW 9/41, and seeking clarification from official sources when in doubt. A decision-making framework should prioritize legal compliance, understanding that the privilege of carrying a concealed pistol comes with significant responsibilities. When faced with a situation where carrying a firearm might be considered, the first step should always be to determine the legality of carrying in that specific location, according to Washington state law. Question 17. The risk matrix shows a heightened potential for conflict at a local park in Seattle, Washington, where a person legally carrying a concealed pistol under a Washington state concealed pistol license, CPL, perceives an individual approaching them in an aggressive and threatening manner. The perceived threat is not yet physical, but the individual's body language and verbalizations are causing significant alarm. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the concealed pistol license holder? Option A. Leave the area immediately without engaging or reporting the incident, assuming the aggressive individual will not follow. Option B. Immediately draw the concealed pistol and point it at the approaching individual to ensure their immediate compliance and prevent any potential physical confrontation. Option C. Immediately cease any overt display of the firearm, maintain situational awareness, and if the threat escalates to imminent danger of death or serious bodily harm, be prepared to act within the bounds of Washington state self-defense laws, while also considering contacting law enforcement to report the aggressive behavior. Option D. Draw the concealed pistol and openly display it to the approaching individual to deter them from continuing their aggressive approach. The correct answer is C. Immediately cease any overt display of the firearm, maintain situational awareness, and if the threat escalates to imminent danger of death or serious bodily harm, be prepared to act within the bounds of Washington state self-defense laws, while also considering contacting law enforcement to report the aggressive behavior. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between a citizen's perceived right to self-defense and the specific legal requirements for carrying a concealed pistol in Washington state. The individual's emotional state and immediate perceived threat, while understandable, must be weighed against the established legal framework. Careful judgment is required to ensure adherence to the law, while acknowledging the nuances of personal safety concerns. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to immediately cease any action that could be construed as brandishing or threatening with the firearm, and to contact law enforcement to report the incident and the presence of the firearm. This approach is correct because Washington state law, specifically RCW 9/41/050, unlawful possession of a firearm, outlines the conditions under which a person may carry a concealed pistol, while RCW 9/41/060 permits carrying a pistol concealed without a license under certain circumstances, e.g., on one's own property. The scenario implies the individual is in a public place where a CPL would generally be required for concealed carry. Furthermore, even with a CPL, the act of displaying or threatening with a firearm in a manner that causes alarm, absent an immediate and justifiable threat of death or serious bodily harm, could lead to charges such as assault or disorderly conduct. By ceasing the display and contacting authorities, the individual demonstrates an understanding of legal boundaries and a commitment to resolving the situation through lawful channels, rather than escalating it through potentially illegal or reckless actions. This aligns with the principle of responsible firearm ownership and adherence to Washington's firearm regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to continue to openly display the firearm to deter the perceived threat. This is a regulatory failure because, in Washington state, while a CPL allows for concealed carry, openly displaying a firearm in a manner that causes alarm, without immediate justification of self-defense against a credible threat of death or serious bodily harm, can be considered unlawful display or even assault, depending on the circumstances. It bypasses the legal framework for de-escalation and lawful response. Another incorrect approach is to immediately draw the firearm and point it at the perceived threat. This is a severe regulatory and ethical failure. Washington law requires a reasonable belief of imminent danger of death or great bodily harm to justify the use of deadly force. Drawing and pointing a firearm without meeting this high threshold constitutes an unlawful brandishing of a weapon and could lead to criminal charges, including assault. It represents a failure to exercise restraint and to follow the legal procedures for self-defense. A further incorrect approach is to leave the scene without any attempt to de-escalate or report the incident. While leaving a potentially dangerous situation might seem prudent, failing to report the presence of a firearm, and the confrontation could be problematic if the other party reports it, potentially leading to misunderstandings or investigations where the individual's actions are not fully contextualized. It also misses an opportunity to ensure the situation is resolved lawfully and safely for all parties involved. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, de-escalation, and responsible action. This involves 1. Assessing the immediate threat level against the legal standards for self-defense in Washington state. 2. Understanding the specific requirements for carrying and displaying firearms under Washington law, RCW 9/41. 3. Prioritizing de-escalation techniques over immediate physical response. 4. Knowing when and how to contact law enforcement for assistance. 5. Documenting the incident accurately if necessary. The goal is to resolve the situation in a manner that is both safe and legally defensible. Question 18. The risk matrix shows a patron at a Washington state establishment exhibiting increasingly agitated and loud behavior, drawing attention and causing discomfort to other patrons. The concealed pistol licensee observes this individual making aggressive gestures towards another patron who is attempting to ignore them. The licensee is legally carrying a concealed pistol. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensee? Option A. Create distance from the situation. Observe the individual's behavior for further escalation, and if the behavior becomes a direct threat to themselves or others, discreetly contact law enforcement. Option B. Engage the agitated patron in a loud, verbal confrontation to assert authority and demand they leave the establishment. Option C. Continue their current activity without acknowledging the agitated patron, assuming the situation will resolve itself. Option D. Immediately draw their concealed pistol and verbally command the agitated patron to cease their disruptive behavior. The correct answer is A. Create distance from the situation, observe the individual's behavior for further escalation, and if the behavior becomes a direct threat to themselves or others, discreetly contact law enforcement. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct confrontation with an individual who is exhibiting concerning behavior, potentially escalating to a threat. While the licensee is legally carrying a concealed pistol, the licensee must balance their right to self-defense with the legal and ethical responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed firearm in Washington state. Misjudging the situation could lead to unnecessary escalation, legal repercussions, or a failure to act when necessary for safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalation and avoidance of unnecessary confrontation. This approach prioritizes the safety of all parties involved by attempting to defuse the situation without resorting to the display or use of a firearm. It aligns with the principles of responsible firearm ownership and the legal framework in Washington state, which emphasizes that a firearm is a tool of last resort for self-defense against imminent danger. The licensee should create distance, disengage from the interaction, and if the behavior persists or escalates, contact law enforcement. This is the most prudent course of action as it minimizes risk and adheres to the spirit of concealed carry laws, which are intended for lawful self-defense, not for enforcing social norms or engaging in altercations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately displaying the concealed pistol. This action is premature and escalates the situation unnecessarily. In Washington, the use or display of a firearm is generally only justified when there is a reasonable belief of imminent danger of death or great bodily harm. Displaying a weapon without such imminent threat can be construed as aggressive, potentially leading to legal consequences for the licensee and provoking the individual further. Another incorrect approach is to verbally confront the individual aggressively and demand they cease their behavior. While the individual's behavior may be disruptive or offensive, engaging in a verbal altercation while armed can quickly turn volatile. This approach bypasses de-escalation and directly invites conflict, increasing the risk of physical confrontation where the licensee might feel compelled to use their firearm under duress, even if the initial threat was not at that level. A further incorrect approach is to ignore the situation completely and continue walking without any attempt to create distance or assess the ongoing threat. While avoidance is generally good, complete inaction, without assessing the potential for escalation or harm to oneself or others, might be a missed opportunity to de-escalate or seek assistance. If the individual's behavior is directed at the licensee or poses a clear danger to others nearby, a passive approach without any protective measures or reporting could be detrimental. Professional reasoning. Professionals carrying a concealed pistol in Washington state should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation, situational awareness, and adherence to legal justifications for firearm use. This involves assessing the immediate threat level, considering options for disengagement and avoidance, and only resorting to the display or use of a firearm as a last resort when facing imminent danger. When in doubt, contacting law enforcement is always a viable and often preferable option to engaging in potentially volatile confrontations. Question 19. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a confrontation escalating with an aggressive individual in a public parking lot in Seattle, Washington. You are legally carrying a concealed pistol under your CPL. The individual begins yelling at you and approaching aggressively, but has not made any physical contact or produced a weapon. What is the most prudent course of action to ensure your safety and maintain legal compliance? Option A. Continue your original activity as if the individual is not there, hoping they will lose interest and leave. Option B. Call 911 to report the aggressive individual and remain in place, observing them closely and preparing to draw your firearm if they advance further. Option C. Immediately and calmly disengage from the situation by walking away and creating distance without displaying your firearm. Option D. Display your concealed firearm to the aggressive individual to intimidate them into backing down. The correct answer is C. Immediately and calmly disengage from the situation by walking away and creating distance without displaying your firearm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between a citizen's right to self-defense and the legal requirements for carrying a concealed pistol in Washington state. The individual's perceived threat, while real to them, must be evaluated against objective legal standards and the specific circumstances of the situation. Misinterpreting the legal framework or acting impulsively can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of their concealed pistol license, CPL. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between a genuine, imminent threat justifying the brandishing of a firearm and a situation where such action is legally prohibited. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediately de-escalating the situation and disengaging from the confrontation without displaying the firearm. This aligns with Washington state law, which permits the carrying of a concealed pistol but does not grant a license to brandish or use it in situations that do not constitute imminent danger of death or serious bodily harm. RCW 9-41-070 outlines the requirements for carrying a concealed pistol, and while it allows for concealed carry, it does not authorize its display in a threatening manner unless legally justified. Prioritizing de-escalation and avoiding unnecessary confrontation is the most responsible course of action, preserving the individual's safety and legal standing. Incorrect approaches analysis. Displaying the firearm to the aggressive individual to intimidate them into leaving is legally problematic. While the individual may feel threatened, Washington law requires an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm to justify the display or use of a firearm. Simply being yelled at or confronted, even aggressively, does not automatically meet this threshold. This action could be construed as unlawful display of a weapon or assault, depending on the specific circumstances and the perception of the other party. Calling the police and informing them of the situation, but continuing to stand your ground and observe the individual closely, ready to draw the firearm if necessary, is also a risky approach. While involving law enforcement is prudent, remaining in a confrontational stance and being ready to draw can escalate the situation and may be interpreted as aggressive intent. The focus should be on creating distance and disengaging, not on maintaining a ready-to-act posture in a non-imminent threat scenario. Leaving the scene immediately without any interaction, even if the individual is still present, is a missed opportunity to ensure personal safety and potentially de-escalate. While disengagement is key, a complete lack of acknowledgement or a hurried departure might not fully address the immediate perceived threat and could leave the individual feeling vulnerable. However, compared to displaying the weapon, this is a less problematic approach, but not the most proactive in ensuring safety and legal compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legal compliance, and de-escalation. This involves assessing the immediate threat level objectively, considering the legal parameters for the use of force in Washington state, and choosing actions that minimize risk to oneself and others. When faced with aggression, the primary goal should be to disengage and create distance. If a firearm is carried, its display or use should be a last resort, only when there is an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm. In situations of verbal aggression or confrontation without immediate physical danger, de-escalation and avoidance are the most professional and legally sound responses. Question 20. The evaluation methodology shows that a Washington state resident whose concealed pistol license, CPL, expired on January 15, 2023, is applying for a renewal on March 1, 2024. To determine eligibility for renewal without needing to reapply as a new applicant, they need to calculate the exact number of days between the expiration of their previous license and the date of their renewal application. If the number of days is 400 or more, they would be considered a new applicant. What is the exact number of days between January 15, 2023 and March 1, 2024? Option A, 400 days. Option B, 410 days. Option C, 406 days. Option D, 395 days. The correct answer is C, 406 days. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that this scenario is professionally challenging due to the need to balance personal safety considerations with the legal requirements for carrying a concealed pistol in Washington state. The applicant must accurately calculate the time elapsed between their last CPL renewal and the current application date, ensuring they meet the statutory timeframe for renewal without lapse. Miscalculation could lead to a denial of the application or, worse, carrying a concealed pistol with an expired license, which carries significant legal penalties. The best professional approach involves meticulous record-keeping and accurate date calculation. This means precisely determining the date of the previous CPL issuance or renewal and comparing it to the current application date. Washington State Law, specifically Revised Code of Washington RCW 9/41/170, outlines the renewal process and the time frame within which an application must be submitted to maintain continuity. By calculating the exact number of days, the applicant demonstrates diligence and adherence to the legal framework, ensuring their application is processed correctly and they remain compliant with the law. An incorrect approach would be to estimate the time elapsed. This introduces a significant risk of error. If the estimate is too short, the applicant might be carrying illegally. If the estimate is too long, they might be unnecessarily inconvenienced or miss the renewal window. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on memory without verification. Human memory is fallible, and a simple date error can have serious legal consequences. Finally, assuming the previous CPL is still valid without confirming the exact renewal date is a dangerous assumption that bypasses the necessary due diligence required by law. Professionals should approach such situations by prioritizing accuracy and verification. This involves maintaining a personal log of important dates, such as CPL renewal dates, and cross-referencing these with official documentation. When in doubt, consulting official renewal notices or contacting the issuing authority for confirmation is the most prudent course of action. This methodical approach minimizes risk and ensures compliance with all legal requirements.